And this lecture is called Sanatana Dharma, or the Eternal Truth, and it deals primarily with the Vedic philosophies of India. It's a very quick-ish introduction to some of the concepts that you might read or need to be familiar with if you were to study anything in Indian or Vedic philosophy. When we talk about the Vedic philosophies, Veda means sacred knowledge or sacred learning. And according to tradition, there are four original Vedas. There is the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, the Yajur Veda, and the Atharva Veda. These are amongst the oldest writings in the world, according to tradition. And these contain the great wisdom of the ancient world. You have mythologies, you have histories, you have spells and chants, you have liturgies. The sum of knowledge is meant to be contained within the Vedas. But the Vedas are written in such a way that they are rather dense for the average person, and so these are the types of things that the great Vedic scholars, the Brahmins, would be responsible for learning, for studying. For others, we had other writings that came along, such as the Upanishads, the Mahabharata, the Puranas, and the Ramayana. Two of these, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, are essentially epic stories. Just like in the Greek tradition, you might read the Odyssey or the Iliad, or we talked in one of the other videos about the Epic of Gilgamesh. These are stories from the ancient past, very important stories of the ancient past. These were things that were written in such a way that they were telling stories that excited the average person. They could learn a great deal from these while at the same time being entertained through adventure. Now, the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the key things that is studied in many of my classes, is one small chapter from this larger work called the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is the largest epic in the world. It is over 100,000 verses long in its entirety. Basically, if you were to take Homer's Odyssey and Iliad and put them back to back, multiply that by 5, you would have about the size of the Mahabharata in its entirety. Of that, only 740 verses make up the Bhagavad Gita. But yet, the Gita stands aside from this other story as the Bible of the Vedic world. The Ramayana is another great epic, weighs in at about 60,000 verses. These earlier writings are such that the average person would be able to read them, would be able to understand them. And perhaps it could prepare you for something greater than this. Perhaps it could prepare you for the study of the Vedas themselves. But all of the wisdom, all of the knowledge of the Vedas is really contained within these works, and more amazingly, within the Bhagavad Gita itself. Now, there are a lot of different traditions within the Vedic philosophies, and what we have to recognize is that there are certain things that they will share in common, and there are other things that they will not. And so what I'm giving you are the things that all of these traditions seem to share in common. But keep in mind that there are variations, because there are small-scale tribal traditions that make up the greater mantle of Vedic thought. So one of the things that we have sharing in common is what's called the Patashartha, or the four goals of life. These are Kama, Artha, Dharma, and Moksha. Kama is sort of the animalistic stage that everyone starts with. It is the desire to seek pleasure, whether that be physical or emotional. The individual is looking outward and saying, I desire, I want. Much like the animal has their wants and desires within them that they're going to act on because they don't have the rational mind to question whether it's right or acceptable or not. Human beings have that too, particularly in their initial stages. We simply have wants and desires that we want to fulfill, and sometimes we act upon those. Now, the Vedic philosophy is going to tell us that there's actually nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with seeking pleasure. But the problem comes when you realize that no matter how hard you try, you're never going to be completely fulfilled with it, because pleasure is a fleeting and changing thing. You can go off to an amusement park for a day. You can go to a concert one night. You can do all sorts of individual things, and they will bring you pleasure in that moment. But when the event is over, then you realize that, oh, there's something lacking here. There's something missing, and you want that pleasure again. And that's going to make you strive for it even harder to find the next thing that's going to bring in that pleasure. And of course, it's not lasting either. This sense of pleasure that we're seeking is only ever temporary. And so eventually, and it may take many, many lifetimes before we come to the realization, but we come to the realization eventually that no matter how hard we try, that pleasure will always be eluding us. We spend far more time pursuing it than we actually do enjoying it. So we realize that this seeking of basic pleasure cannot be our ultimate goal. And so maybe we'll move on then to the second stage of artha, which is seeking power, fame, wealth. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of these things if they're used in the right way. But we're eventually going to come to that same realization that there are problems with the seeking of these things. And I've mentioned 4 of the major problems with artha on the screen here. First, everybody wants these things, but not everybody can have them. The idea of acquiring wealth, children sometimes say silly things like, oh, I wish I had all the money in the world. But if you had all of the money in the world, money would be worthless. The only reason that it has value is because there's it's a medium of exchange. It's a way for individuals to connect and purchase things with each other, and there's only so much in the world. That makes it limited. And so I may want all of the money, but it doesn't do me any good to have it, because if I had all of the money, then everybody else would not. They'd have to find some other means of barter, some other means of trade to get the things that they desire. They wouldn't want my money anymore because I had it all. In terms of this idea that everybody wants them, but not everybody can have them, we have to realize that there are limitations. There's only so much wealth, there's only so much land. There's only so many people that can hold a position of power. There's only so many people that can be famous, right? I mean, I know it seems like everybody has their desire to find fame in this world. That's, 15 minutes of fame that everybody's looking for. But when it comes down to it, very few people in the world are going to have that sense of fame. If everybody was famous, fame wouldn't mean anything. And same thing in terms of power. Maybe individuals have a desire to rise to become the president, but only so many people are capable of doing that. The resources are limited, so not everybody can have what they want, and that's going to produce unhappiness. Secondly, the drive for success is insatiable. No matter how much you want, you always want more. There's always a desire to have more. It's never enough. No politician has ever said, oh, I'm going to be a one-term alderman and retire. That is a stepping stone to the next position, to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, with that ultimate drive or desire, I want to become president. Even once you've got that, though, it's not enough. You want something more. And that's, again, a problem, because what's higher than that, at least at this point? Fame, again, those people seeking fame, they want more and more and more. People with wealth, they want more and more and more. No matter how much they have, it's not enough. And so we're always looking for more, and that leaves us unsatisfied. Artha is also hedonistic because it centers the meaning upon the self. Because my emphasis is driven by my drive, by my desire, by my want to attain these things. I may end up doing immoral actions. I may do things that harm others. I may not look out for the interests of other human beings because I am simply in pursuit of the self, and that produces problems. And of course, the other final problem with Artha, it's ephemeral. You can't take it with you. It doesn't matter how much power, fame, and wealth you possess. When you're dead, you're dead. So you can be the wealthiest person on the planet, and it can buy you a really fancy tombstone, but that's about it. You can be the most famous or most powerful person on the planet, and all it's going to do is state that on your tombstone. It doesn't do anything for the soul. It doesn't do anything to stretch on beyond this world. And so Artha is troublesome. We can live within that state, and sometimes Kama and Artha are almost simultaneous, but we can live within that state for a while, but eventually we will come to realize these problems, and we will find that it is necessary to escape from Artha as well. And so maybe at this point we'll move on to the third phase, which is Dharma. Now, Dharma is a very rich, very detailed concept. It's one that has multiplicity of meanings. Primarily, I perceive it as this idea of moral harmony that's found within all things. The idea that there is a duty that everyone is expected to perform. Everyone has a role to play within this world. We were put here for a purpose, for a reason. And when individuals act in a state of Dharma, they are enjoying that moral harmony. We are seeing the world as it should be when we are in that state of pure Dharma. Now, to understand Dharma in more detail, there's a little story that I want to get to, but before I do that with the next screen, let's go on to the final stage. Dharma, while it's important, is still not the ultimate goal, because it is still grounded in the here and now. It is better than these others because it extends beyond ourselves. It is something that can enrich the soul. But the ultimate goal is that of moksha, to find liberation from the state of samsara, to find ourselves disappearing from this world of suffering and misery that we're living in, to escape from that. Samsara is that life cycle of being born, living your life, dying, being reborn, and on and on and on. That cycle of samsara is within this world of misery and suffering. And so we desire to escape from it. And moksha becomes that state of liberation. Now, this, of course, is one of the areas where you find people will disagree what exactly moksha is. Is it migration to another place? Is it a transformed state of consciousness? Is it a fading or absorbing into nothingness? What exactly does moksha mean? You'll find a lot of disagreement on that, depending upon which particular group of Vedic thinkers you're dealing with. But the ultimate goal is essentially to escape from samsara. Now, going back to the state of Dharma, I want to relay a story that comes out of the Ramyan. And we're told that within the Vedic calendar, there are 4 yugas, or 4 stages or periods of time. The first period of time is called the Satya Yuga. Satya means truth. But the Satya Yuga lasts for 1.8 million years. In the Satya Yuga, everyone is in their original constitutional position. Each person is what they are meant to be. And that is part and parcel of the divine, part and parcel of God. In the Satya Yuga, there is no sense of ego. There is no sense of individual identity. We are essentially the appendages, if you will. We are the appendages of God. God is that one original entity, that one true being. And it is his will that is being felt throughout the Satya Yuga. And we are simply a part of him. And so our actions are his actions. We are the appendages of that being. Now, at the end of the Satya Yuga, this is where the story is going to come into play, but before I get you to that, we'll talk briefly about these others. In that state of Satya Yuga, we are in a state of pure Dharma. Everything is as it should be. But at the very end of that, ego is going to come into this world. And when that happens, it jolts us into the second era, the second age, the Tretya Yuga, which is going to last for 1.2 million years. And this Tretya Yuga, Dharma is diminished, because more people are starting to think about themselves as separate and apart from God. We start to move away from fulfilling his will towards doing our own. And as we move on to the next stage, the Vipara Yuga, which is going to last for 864,000 years, the Vipara Yuga, Dharma is about half gone by this point. There's much more in the sense of ego. There's much more greed, corruption, want. And finally, about 5,000 years ago, at the time of the story of the Bhagavad Gita, we enter the Kali Yuga, which is our present period of time. We are only 5,000 years into the Kali Yuga, which is going to last for 432,000 years. But the Kali Yuga is the worst of all possible times, because Dharma is almost completely gone. People are no longer showing proper reverence or respect. Individuals are concerned with themselves. They are trapped in these states of artha and kama, and it's very difficult for people to get out of them because of the allure of all of the things that exist within this world to tempt us. But we find through the Bhagavad Gita specifically that there is hope, that we can escape from the Kali Yuga. The story that I wanted to relay takes place at the tail end of the Satya Yuga, and there are these three brothers, Ravana, Kumbhakarna, and Vibhishan. So I'm having difficulties with the camera here. Okay. So Ravana, Kumbhakarna, and Vibhishan, these three brothers, towards the tail end of the Satya Yuga, are going to go up to the top of a mountain, and they're going to sit there for 10,000 years, simply in contemplation of the magnificence, the glory, the wonder that is God. Now, of course, people lived for hundreds of thousands of years during that time period, so 10,000 years is a long time, certainly to sit on a mountaintop, but it's not, as it would be for us today with our minimalistic 100-year lifespan. Just as the periods of yuga are such that they went down, down, down in terms of length of time, our lifespans have done the same thing. In the Satya Yuga, we might have almost lived forever. By the time we get to the Kali Yuga, we're lucky to make 100. So anyway, they sit on this mountaintop for 10,000 years in contemplation of the glory of God. When Brahma is the first created being, the creator deity. And when Brahma hears this, he's very impressed. And he says, I want to reward these three brothers. And so, ask of me anything that you want, anything that you desire, and I will grant it to you. Well, Ravana had already started to awaken, in a sense of ego within himself. And this asking, tell me what you want, what you desire, really emboldens that and really causes it to wake up. And Ravana says, I want to come to control and dominate this land. I want to be the great king of this world, to control things the way I wish, the way I desire. But I can do that on my own, but only if I know that I'm not going to be damaged in some way by the gods or by the demons. And so for my boon, I ask you to not allow me to be harmed by any gods or any demons. And so in his arrogance, of course, he doesn't think he has anything to fear from humans or animals, so he doesn't ask for protection from them. That is ultimately his Achilles heel, because Rama is going to come down into this world, God in human form. Hanuman is going to come into this world, another god, this time in monkey form. And so a combination of humans and animals are ultimately going to be his downfall. But in any event, he asks for that, and Brahma gives it to him. You are now protected. You cannot be harmed by gods or demons. The large slob laying down on the ground there is Kumbhakarna. Kumbhakarna was a colossal, massive giant. It was said he was so large that the sun had to arc through his doorway as it went around the earth each day on its orbit. And anyway, the other demigods became very concerned. I mean, how can you give Kumbhakarna a boon? I mean, this guy is so massive, so huge, he could destroy the world if he wanted to. But Brahma says, I gave my word, I have to. So what happens is that Vayu, the wind god, is going to fly into Kumbhakarna's mouth. And when Brahma asks the question, hey, tell me quickly what you desire that I may give it to you. Before Kumbhakarna can formulate the words, Vayu speaks out. And he says, all I ask for is that I be allowed to sleep for 6 months for every day that I have to be awake. And immediately Kumbhakarna fell over asleep. And this protects the world from clumsiness, from oafishness, because while those things are around on occasion, they're not around very often. And finally, we come to Vibhishan. Vibhishan is known as the good brother, the good demon. And Vibhishan says, the only thing that I ask for is that I never be allowed to forget Dharma. Brahma is so impressed by that he says, of course I'll grant you that gift, but I'll give you something else you didn't ask for. I will give you immortality. So for as long as you live, which will be forever, Dharma will always be remembered. So no matter how horrible, no matter how bad the world becomes, there is always an opportunity to get back to Dharma, to get back to where we should be. Because Vibhishan is there to remind us of that. He's there to remember it. He's there to keep it alive. And over time, Vibhishan transforms himself into our conscience. And he becomes that little voice that sits on your shoulder, whispering in your ear, saying, don't do that. And of course, it's easy enough to discount it, but that little voice is there. And that voice is Vibhishan. So, Dharma is crucial to our well-being in this world. Dharma implies us acting in a morally right way. Dharma implies recognizing that we have a particular duty to perform. And each person's duty is going to be a little different from each other's. Within the Vedic tradition, you're probably aware there are 4 major castes. There are a lot of smaller, minor castes, but the 4 major castes, you have the Brahman, which is the priestly caste, the Kshatriya, which is the warrior caste, the Vaishya, which is the merchant caste, and the Shudra, which is the labor caste. The Brahman, or the priestly caste, these are the individuals who are responsible for guiding society. These are the ones who spend their time in study of the Vedas, in trying to reach that understanding and that knowledge and being able to guide the rest of us with it. Kshatriyas, these are the warriors, the fighters who protect the kingdom. But like Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, we have to recognize that a warrior's duty is to fight for a just cause. It is not to fight for glory. It's not to fight for your own advancement, but it is to fight for a just cause. This is also where the kings, where the rulers of society would come from, because in the ancient world, kings tended to have to claim and protect their territory, so you had warrior kings. The Vaishyas, these are the merchant castes. These are the people who are in business, the sellers, the traders. And the Sudras are your common laborers. Each one of these individuals is crucial to the well-being and the proper running of society. And each one has their own specific duty to follow. We'll hear more about the castes in another video. Another thing that we find is shared in common is the idea of yoga systems. Yoga, when we think about yoga today, we tend to think of what I call Hollywood yoga, where people twist themselves into bizarre shapes and things like that. But in the Vedic tradition, the yogas are more mental speculation, that they are more a mental discipline. Within the Vedic tradition, it's acknowledged that there are a lot of different yoga paths that a person can follow. And each individual has to choose the one that is best, the one that is going to work for that person, because it's not one size fits all. So we have different types of people, so we have different types of yogas. The first three that are mentioned here are actually ones that are discussed in the Bhagavad Gita as being useful tools to help us reach that state of moksha. So if you are a reflective type of person, somebody that likes to study, somebody that likes to read, seeking knowledge, Gnan Yoga might be the path you'd want to take. Gnan Yoga uses learning and thinking. These are the people that would sit down and try to come to know God through the study of Scripture. If you are an emotional type of person, someone who sort of wears their heart on their sleeve, then Bhakti Yoga might be the one for you. The aim here is to direct towards God the love that lies at the base of every heart. Through Bhakti Yoga, you are performing actions, you're performing activities and duties that are crucial. But you are doing them for God, not for yourself. If you are an active kind of person, Karma Yoga might be the one for you. Karma Yoga is the path to God through work. And so, for example, when we wash dishes, we do it usually quick as we can so that we can have clean dishes to eat off of. We try to get through with it, get done. Through Karma Yoga, you would wash these dishes to the very best of your ability, and you would be offering that service up to God. You would be saying, I am doing this to glorify you. Now, in the end, you're still going to have dishes to eat off of. You still get the physical result, but it's not about you. And that's the whole point of all of these, is taking you out of the picture so that you are not thinking about and stressing the ego, but you are stressing God. There is a fourth form of yoga that's mentioned briefly in the Gita, and this is Raja Yoga for those that are experimentally inclined. This is the way to God through psychophysical experiments. In essence, the Gita warns us against this form of yoga. It says that it is very dangerous because what it does is ultimately to bring more suffering, more pain, more misery into a world that is already full of pain and misery and suffering. This is much like where medieval monks would flagellate themselves, would punish the bodies to try to liberate the souls. The Vedic tradition would do the same thing. Sleeping on a bed of nettles, walking on tacks, walking through fire even, but doing things essentially to punish the body as a way of liberating the soul. The Buddha actually said that he tried this technique at one point, and he lived on, his asceticism was such that he lived on as little as 5 grains of rice a day. And rather than bringing him enlightenment, it said it nearly killed him. And so the Buddhist tradition, as well as the other Vedic traditions, are going to say, shouldn't do that one. It works only in very rare instances and only with very few people. We have talked about the concept of God within the Vedic tradition, and you're probably familiar already with concepts such as monotheism, the idea that there is one God, or polytheism, the idea that there is a multiplicity of gods. Well, the Vedic tradition actually is neither of those. It is what's called henotheistic. Henotheism is the idea that there is one God, but that God is known in many different forms. In essence, Christianity is also henotheistic, because you have one God, but that God is known in 3 forms, as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The difference is that in the Vedic tradition, instead of God being known in 3 forms, he's known in 30,000 forms. The 3 that most people hear of are Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Vishnu is the sustainer. Vishnu is that one ultimate deity, and Vishnu and Krishna from the Bhagavad Gita are one and the same. And so Vishnu is that ultimate deity who creates Brahma, the first created being, who is then himself the creator deity that brings this world into existence, and is going to be responsible also for creating Shiva, which is the destroyer deity. Just as we live our life in this continual cycle of samsara, where we're born, live our lives, die, reborn, and so on, the same is true in this Vedic tradition for the universe. The universe is brought into existence by Brahma, is sustained by Vishnu, is destroyed by Shiva, and from the destruction comes a new rebirth as that cycle continues on and on and on. Each of these deities also have other demigods that are brought into existence for various reasons throughout history. The phrase there, the quote from the Rig Veda says, "Truth is one, though the sages know it is many." And this applies obviously to the concept of God. There is only one God, but there are many different forms. There's many different ways to know it and be familiar with it. And we see that also with our pathway towards the divine. And that is to acknowledge that Gnan Yoga, for example, is not going to work for everybody. Maybe karmic yoga works better for someone else. There are many different paths. There are many different ways to achieve the truth, to come to know it. But in the end, they're all leading eventually to the same place, because there is only one truth. The last thing is this concept of Om. We've all heard the concept of Om before. It's used as a mantra meditation. You see it on television and whatnot. But this is really the symbol of the Vedic traditions, and it's a very important one. Now, it can be spelled O-M, which is the way we usually see it in print in English, or the way I prefer it, which is A-U-M. It is defined here As the sound and vibration are the divine representation of existence, encompassing all of manifold nature into the one eternal truth, it is representative of the first manifestation of the unmanifest Brahman. What that means is that the Om is the ultimate sound of the breath of God. God creates through words, right? Even in the Western Judeo-Christian traditions, we have this idea that God speaks the universe into existence. And so ultimately, it is the breath of God that brings everything into being. And so the Om is that sound representation. The Om is the breath of God that links and connects all parts of the universe together. This is rather interesting because this is a concept that's been around in Vedic philosophy for thousands upon thousands of years. Only recently, within the latter 20th century, have scientists started talking about a concept called string theory, whereby every universe hums at a particular resonance. And it is these invisible strings that vibrate, that connect the universe together. It's why the phase of the moon has an effect upon the tides. But this is an idea that the Vedics have had for thousands and thousands of years, seeing instead of invisible rubber bands, simply the voice of God as that hum or that resonance. And that sound is Om. Now, when we use Om as a mantra meditation, it's very important, and the reason I like the AUM spelling better is it helps to remind us of this. When we pronounce the A, we're letting air into the mouth. We're bringing it in, we're filling it up. And that's the act of creation. As we pronounce the U of the Om, we are sustaining, we're holding the breath there. And on the pronouncement of the M at the end, we're letting the air back out of the mouth. And there is the act of destruction being represented. So every time that we use that word Om in meditation, we are recreating that act of the universe being created, sustained, and destroyed. And of course, there is also this fourth element, this silence, this séjour that comes at the end. And that serves two purposes. One, as you are pronouncing the Om, it gives you a moment to catch your breath from one to the next. But that moment of silence also is going to serve as a reminder that just as we are seeking to end our own personal cycle of samsara, there will eventually come a time when that silence of the universe will stretch on throughout all of eternity, and there will never be another pronouncement of Om. And that's the state that we're hoping for. That's the state that we're looking for in this Vedic tradition. Because when that happens, then we have effectively gone home. So I do apologize for the difficulties with the camera earlier in this lecture, but hopefully this has given you a little bit of background, a little bit of knowledge that can help you to understand as you're reading through the various traditions of Vedic philosophy, reading the Bhagavad Gita, or any of the other writings of the Vedic tradition.